Alrighty, here we go. SickMotion here with the patch 6.22 notes. This is the preseason for the next season, so it's kind of might as well call it Season seven's first patch. It's super long as the preseason patches are. I'm going to try and do it as quick as possible. It's going to be long regardless of how fast I try and do it, unless I just kind of like literally skip entire sections. I'll probably do it in sections, try and keep it somewhat organized in the sections I do. So the first part here, it's the assassin updates. Top four here are the major ones, and then there's minor ones for these bottom six, as well as one of the big things for this assassin update is the stealth kind of rework, I guess, kind of changing the way stealth is defined and works and differentiating stealth and camouflage, which we'll get into a little bit later in here. So you're probably going to want to watch these little YouTube video breakdown things and to get a better feeling for it. But we'll just go over it really quick here. I did take an extra day before doing this video so that I would get more time to play on this patch, play these champions, play some of the changes. I haven't got around to all of it, honestly. It would take a little longer than that. But I got a general feeling for a lot of it, so I'm more than just kind of talking about what's on the paper because you guys can kind of just do that yourselves and look at it. I'll kind of explain from my experiences where I can. The base movement speed is down. That feels real bad because, I mean, he's a melee assassin. His mobility actually feels less now in lane if you're not using the wall hops and whatnot. But there's a stat breakdown change. His passive, after hitting the enemy 3 times, your next auto attack will do bonus damage. It'll bleed. It's basically kind of the bleed from his Q is moved into his passive. You have to hit them with spells 3 times. Auto attacks won't count. So your blade's going out on your W, coming back in, that's 2, and then you hit them with your Q, that's 3, and then you'll have to auto attack them. You have to apply an auto attack or else it won't proc. Just having 3 stacks is not enough. Does a bleed, has a nice bonus attack damage ratio on it over 2 seconds. And it scales. There's a couple other places that I noticed this. This scales up to the part where it is maxed scaling. At level 11, a lot of these scale up to mid game, not to level 18. A lot of games end before level 18, so scaling stuff to level 18. Not overly that big of a point. Completely honestly, if they scaled this to level 18 and gave you an extra, say it went to 190 rather than 160 at level 18, then to get to this 160, you'd probably have to wait longer. You wouldn't get it to level 11, so you wouldn't have as strong of a mid game on an assassin, which is where you're trying to play for. And you get an extra 30 damage over the next 7 levels, which is probably where they would put it around. That extra 30 damage at level 18, you're not really going to care about in a lot of situations, other than those rare cases where the person gets away with 30 health. And even then, that 30 damage gets mitigated by other stuff. The big scaling thing here is you get later on in the game, you have a 2 attack damage, 2 bonus attack damage. So you buy an item, has 60 AD, all right, your bleed does 120 more damage. That 30 is no longer seeming like that much. So I like the scaling into mid game so that it feels like it's stronger early type thing. The Q is now somewhat of a blink. It has 2 parts. They changed a bunch of stuff on it. It's 30 mana at all ranks. It has a 550 range if used from out of range. It's not an auto attack. It's not an on hit. It does not apply on hit effects. It doesn't count as your auto. So you can auto Q in between it and then auto again right after. It doesn't interrupt your auto attack animation or anything. So you can get a big burst off. If you use it within melee range, it does kind of a mini crit. I think that would work with Infinity Edge because it says critically strikes, but it goes for 150 damage instead of the 200 of a normal crit. Does a lot of damage. It's quite a nuke there. And if you're out of range, up to 550, you can use it as a gap closer. If it kills a unit, it will refund 50% of its cooldown and heal you for a certain amount. So you can use it to farm. It'll heal for a flat amount of 17 to 51, and that scales up to level 18. But yeah, that's one of the kind of major changes. The rake has a slimmer spread on it. It doesn't fan out as far. The slow duration is less. The slow amount is more, but it's less duration. The mana cost is down 5 at all ratings. The cooldown is down 1 second at all ratings. Rake slow now only applies when they return, so it applies a shorter slow only when they return, and the delay from them returning is a little bit slower as well. They go out a little further, but like I was saying, they fan out about half of what they used to fan, so you kind of have to aim it better. It doesn't just kind of apply to that side of the map. The initial damage is down, the return damage is up, and the bonus attack damage on both of those is both up, so the ratios are up. Overall, the bonus attack damage ratio is, if both sides hit, is higher, and the base damage is higher at lower levels, but lower at higher levels. I was playing around with leveling Q first and leveling W first. I haven't decided what I liked more. W is really important for roaming to clear the wave, but if you get a time in first and max Q, it felt alright. So we'll see where that goes. The W, or sorry, the new E doesn't cost mana. There's a 2-second cooldown at all ranks to use the ability again, and then there's a cooldown on the piece of terrain that you hop. It'll show an outline of the terrain that you hopped. It's kind of hard to know until you kind of get used to it to predict like where the terrain is going to get locked out to. It seems like the lockout points are kind of awkward in some locations because it doesn't lock out the entire piece of terrain because some pieces are pretty big. Thicker pieces have a harder time going through, but you can go through some pretty thick ones. If you go on an angle on skinnier ones, it will kind of think of like a Rek'Sai tunnel. It doesn't just hop you over the wall right there. It'll go on an angle over the wall, and you'll appear like really far away from where you did and over the wall. So it'll take some getting used to, honestly. The cooldown on terrain goes down as you level it. That's good. You want that to happen because you don't want to be locked out of jumping over something for almost 3 minutes when it could be 30 or 60 seconds. And I'm pretty sure that scales with your CDR as well. You can vault over player-made terrain as well. It doesn't have a mana cost, so you can use it to get back to lane faster. It's kind of cool that way. His ult now is lower base damage. The blades have a minimum lifetime of 0.8 before returning to Talon, so you can't just pop it in and out. You have to wait a little bit, so you can't just insta-burst, but you still kill people pretty quick. And blades can now be redirected onto the target of Talon's first basic attack, so you can dash to them with your Q while you're in stealth and hit them with that, slow them with your W, and then the blades will converge onto them where you autoed. And apparently there's way more blades. I'm not sure the significance of that. It's important to note that this is a stealth and not a camouflage. I'm going to go over the stealth mechanics really quick here while we're here, and then we'll go up and go back over the other assassins. Just because it's going to apply to a lot of them. They all have kind of stealth or camouflage mechanics, most of them. Camouflage is kind of like Evelynn, her passive used to be. It's kind of untouched there. You are not seen walking over normal wards. You're still seen by the control wards, which are the new version of pink wards. You're still seen if you walk too close. When you're playing a champion, you have that circle indicator where they'd be able to see you. So you just kind of try and stay out of that circle indicator. And when you get too close to them, they see you, and then you try and get away, and then you stealth again. So Rengar's ult is now that. Twitch's Q is now that. They're no longer stealths. So camouflage, when you get close enough, you will see them if you get close enough to a camouflage target. Invisibility, which is kind of the stronger stealth. Akali's W, Kha'Zix ult, LeBlanc's R, Shaco's Q, Talon's ult, like I said. Teemo's passive when he stealths in a bush, they removed the name. It was just called camouflage, which would be confusing. They changed some other names that had camouflage in it that actually stealthed you, just so that, or put you invisible, so that you wouldn't get confused just on the wording. Vayne's ult and Wukong's decoy. Wukong I don't think is mentioned at all in this patch, but I think he's going to be a lot stronger since you can't just drop a pink ward to kind of counter that. I think Teemo, his traps are going to be a little weaker because the wards can disable them, but stealthing in a bush is going to be a lot stronger. And the shimmer effect is the kind of the counterplay to stealth. When you damage an invisible or camouflaged enemy with a skill shot area of effect ability, it'll cause the air around them to shimmer to kind of show like, yeah, I'm right here, but it doesn't reveal them to be able to be targeted. It just shows you where they are, kind of like if you would use a sweeper. It doesn't look the same as using a sweeper, but think about the sweeper. You can kind of see where they're going, but you can't target them. It's kind of like that. Champions only shimmer up to once per second, even if they take additional damage, so it's not like you can just dot or apply an area of effect in an area that there's a stealth champion, it just shows exactly where he is. It's kind of like Rek'Sai's Tunnel Sense, where it'll like shimmer and then nothing, and then he'll shimmer where he is at the new location. But I think that's pretty cool. The shimmer effect to that, and then the differentiation between those. It does make stealth feel a lot more meaningful, but it also has little bits of counterplay. We'll see how it plays out. I mean, I think Akali's really, really strong right now. We'll go over her mini rework as well, but the stuff they changed on her, she feels great. Cat's a lot of fun. I was enjoying playing Cat quite a lot. It's going to be some getting used to, just getting a feel for it. But there's a lot of there's a lot of skill ceiling just based on how they set it up. Her Q still throws a dagger that'll hit 3 targets maximum. It'll always fall if it hits 1 target, or if it hits 3 targets, it'll always take the same amount of time to fall. And where is it here? Picking up a dagger causes Katarina to slash all enemies around her in a small area. So think about her old W where you would just press that and you would slash all around. That's what picking up a dagger does. And you can pick up the dagger from any side of it or directly on top of it. And wherever you pick it up from, you could have a dagger in the same spot and pick it up from 2 different sides, and your little spin slash will hit different areas, quite different areas. So you can kind of choose where you want to do the flourish at. There's all the different stat changes here. The dagger radius is 350, like I said, so you can pick it up on 340. So you can pick it up on one side, flourish there, pick it up on the other side, flourish there. It doesn't really say much here. I just remember from what I was reading before, it'll always land the same distance from, I think, the first target hit, because that's the only thing you can really control. Behind it, I'm not exactly sure. You'd have to look into like the more advanced, like on the wiki or somewhere. And it'll always have the same land time from where the first target is hit to where it lands, whether it hits 3 targets or hits 1. So you can get used to that, and there's not much RNG on it after that, after you do it. You can also throw a dagger at someone who is running away and they're by a wall, and the dagger will bounce over the wall if it's a skinny wall, which is important because it's how you set up your mobility now. Her W tosses a dagger in the air, so you can drop a dagger with your Q. You can drop a dagger right where you're standing with your W. So you can have 2 daggers on the ground like that, and then if you're getting resets, you can always have those daggers that you've already thrown, get resets on your skills, drop more, and then you have daggers everywhere, and you're able to like fly around the map. You gain a short burst of movement speed that decays over the duration. It's very, very short, but the picking up of the dagger does damage, like her old W does. Dropping the dagger doesn't do damage, but picking it up does, so you want to pick them up near enemy champions. And the new change here is the Shun Po. You can't go to wards anymore, but you can get that dagger to bounce over the wall if you do it properly. But despite all the scaling and stuff here, Shun Po now targets an area around Katarina's target and strikes the nearest enemy if cast on an ally or a dagger. In addition to allied units, Katarina can target daggers with Shun Po. Targeting a dagger or walking over it refunds a certain percentage of Shun Po's total cooldown. It changes at different levels, not according to the level of the ability itself. It's actually just based on your champion's level. It now resets her basic attack timer, so you can use it as attack reset. So if you Shun Po to something, you automatically attack it instantly because your attack timer has been reset. Like I said, you can't target wards, but you can. You throw a dagger at the person you want to go to. You can jump to them, hit them with your auto, pick up the dagger. Your Shun Po's cooldown's basically refunded, and then if you drop the dagger before you went, you can bounce back to that, pick it up, and have your Shun Po up cooldown again. One thing that I was doing, the Death Lotus cannot be cancelled by movement or basic attacks for the first quarter second, so quality of life thing, so you don't screw yourself. Displays a Death Lotus radius to Katarina and her enemy, so how far you have to get away to stop getting hit by it. The changes in the damage here, I'm not really going to go over the changes in the damage for the most part, just unless it's super meaningful, and even then I might skip it, just because that's something you more would want to look at here. If you throw a Q and then you dash onto the person you want to with your Shunpo, and then you want to start ulting, just press your W before you start ulting, and then the dagger will drop right on you. You're not going to be moving while you're ulting anyway, and then that'll refresh the cooldown of your E right away. I was doing that the last game I played Cat. We lost. I'm not very good at Cat, but she is a lot of fun. She's one of the only assassins that actually doesn't have a stealth mechanic. So here's LeBlanc. LeBlanc is I think the only one I haven't played yet. Some of her stuff looks confusing, so I'm not really going to be going over her like too in depth just because I haven't experienced it. Her passive no longer is the splitting when she gets low. It applies a sigil to targets that she hits with her abilities. Lasts 4 seconds, takes 1.5 seconds to arm, so you can't pop it instantly, and it just has that much damage with a 0.8 ability power ratio. So it's strong. It was basically like marking with the old Q kind of thing. Shatter her Q, different name, no longer applies a mark. If it triggers her passive, it changed to the nearest ready sigil of malice as well. So kind of like a rise bouncing of the flux targets is what it reminded me of. Shadow Orb bounce deals 120% damage to minions, so she has AoE wave clear without using her distortion. Her distortion is relatively the same, but it has a delay before returning to her original position now. It's only a quarter second. Her E has a tether range that displays to both enemies and allies, and it no longer slows. And her ultimate now, this is where it's kind of confusing. Her ultimate, you can use it to mimic the mimic cooldown, which is her ultimate. You can use it to mimic any other ability. If you use it to mimic her ult, it creates a copy of her. This is where like I haven't played the champion, so kind of confused on it. So I'm not gonna really explain it too much. Like I said, people who have played her 1 or 2 more times probably have a better understanding than I would anyway, just from what I've seen in games. Can mimic any of LeBlanc's spells, not just her most recently used. Stealth duration on cast is 0.1 seconds. Mimicked ability, mimic basic ability clone duration is 2.5. So it'll summon a clone that'll both cast the same thing. The clones doesn't do damage, but the clone actually now casts an ability, so it's harder to tell which one's the clone and which one isn't the clone. If you mimic the ultimate itself, it has a global range, so you can kind of just throw an ult and show bottom lane with your ult to make them think you're there and then actually be ganking top lane, which that'll be some weird micromanagement. But the mimicked damage here tells you how much it's doing, depending on what ability you use. So it's sort of the same, but a little bit different. Like I said, a little bit confusing that I haven't tried it. I just really wasn't interested in playing her. Rengar I played feels kind of clunky. I don't know if it's just because it's a pretty big change. His Q is no longer an on hit; it's an actual ability, like kind of like a Riven Q, but only one that you use. And if you use it with like out of range, he'll sort of lunge forward, sort of like one cast of a Riven Q. It can't go over walls or anything though, and it just kind of feels clunky because you stop moving to cast the ability, especially if you don't lunge on it. It feels clunky, so you can't. It's not like auto attacking and then resetting your auto attack animation to like kind of walk with them and canceling your autos. It's a lot different. It feels clunky and it's targeted. So a lot of times I'll jump on someone and I'll just use it in the wrong direction and then you lose all your damage. It just feels bad. It just feels a lot less fluent and a little more clunky, but that might just be because it's changed and it was just easier to do before. His new passive, he gains a trophy every time he kills a target or gets like a special assist. And by special assist, I mean just because he doesn't get an assist, he gets an assist doesn't mean he's going to get the passive stack here. He has to have done damage to that target that dies within the last second and a half. But you can only get a trophy per one target per game, so you have to kill all champions to get all the trophies. But each trophy gives you a base AD, so it'll give you 1, 3, 6, 10, and 15 base, like just 15 bonus AD for killing all champions once, and then 30% increased attack damage if you have 5, and then you can see the different numbers there. So getting 5 trophies is very important because you can just imagine having like 200 AD. Okay, cool. You just got an extra 75 AD. Fantastic. And I don't know if the percentage takes off the 15, which will give you a little higher, but kind of get the picture. I think the Kha'Zix quest now actually gives you a 6th trophy. I don't know what it puts you to. Just something I heard though. So his Q Oh, also his ferocity stacks, they drop off when you get out of combat, so no longer trying to stack it to use your ult. They'll drop off when you're out of combat, but when you're in combat, casting your abilities will give you those stacks, and you don't actually have to hit someone with your abilities. So if you're counted as in combat, you can just use Q on nothing, and you'll get a ferocity stack. The cooldown on his Q is the same at all levels now. It basically it does like a slash, which is like kind of like a ribbon Q, and then it does like a stab. So it kind of does a time it proc almost, and then like a skinnier time it proc that lunges out further and hits. So it's kind of like a mini Titanic Hydra proc is the second one, and then a Ravenous Hydra proc is the first. And it's a directional AoE. His W no longer gives him the armor and magic resistance. It has a higher cooldown that scales down to what it was before. It now heals Rengar for 50% of the damage he took in the last second and a half. So if you can time it really well while getting bursted, that's pretty strong. It heals 100% of the damage dealt by monsters, so you can let the monsters hit you one time and then heal. You're not gonna have time to get hit again usually. Casting Battle Roar at 4 Ferocity no longer heals Rengar, so you only get the heal based on the damage you've taken. You can't just passively use it to heal. But the 4 Ferocity one breaks all crowd control effects, even if you are CC'd at the time, and renders him immune to incoming crowd control for 1.5 seconds. So it's kind of like a mini Olaf ult, which is pretty strong. When I was playing Rengar, I was using it completely wrong because I couldn't get out of like the muscle memory of it giving you armor and magic resistance based on hitting champions, because it no longer does that. And his E now, the empowered damage scales with level still, a little bit less. The slow is no longer decaying. It scales up. It's no longer 60 at early levels. It breaks even from where it used to be at level 3, but it scales up to 90 rather than 80. It's a little bit shorter, but it doesn't decay over the duration anymore. And his ult, shorter cooldown early, much longer duration that you're in your ult. The cooldown, however, begins when it ends, not when you cast it, because you can stay in it for so much longer. It's a camouflage, so it doesn't keep you stealthed. Kind of like the Evelyn passive. If you get too close, they'll know. You can only see the closest champion to you. You don't see everyone anymore, and the closest champion to you knows the enemy on the enemy team that you can see with your ult knows they can see you. They can't see you necessarily if you're not close enough, but they know that they're the closest one to you because they get a mark on it. You gain movement speed while it's active for the full duration, and not just when you're moving at a champion. And you don't get the bonus movement speed after the stealth. You don't get bonus fury regeneration after the stealth. And yeah, I don't know. Feels kind of clunky. It's something you'd have to see the queue and play with it. Me just telling you about it doesn't probably mean too much. I'm gonna go over these mini updates a little bit faster. I haven't actually played Fizz yet. What haven't I played? I played one game of Kha'Zix, went horribly. Played Akali quite a few times. Haven't played Zed, Fizz, Ekko, or Shaco. But they're pretty straightforward here. Fizz's W is now an auto attack reset that empowers his next attack. The active damage on it is a lot higher. The passive damage is a lot higher as well. It has a higher mana cost, but its cooldown scales. The passive duration is 4 seconds rather than 3. But it's just an empowered auto attack. And let's see here. If Fizz's target is bled for 2 seconds, so if you autoed them within 2 seconds and you've had just the passive damage off on it just from not having it active, it'll be 3 times more damage of your W. So you just hit them with your W to proc it, and you just auto them again. And then as soon as you know it's gonna be the increased one, you can just press W again, reset your auto attack, and do that huge damage. If the active kills a unit, mana is refunded and its cooldown is set to 1, so it makes it easier to farm with it as well. And in addition to basic attacks, Seastone Trident's passive is applied to enemies. His dashes through with his Q. And then if the enemy is affected by Chum the Water, his E, they just kind of changed it. The mana cost is down later on. There's an indicator that shows the area where he damaged after he lands, shows it to enemies, and it shows it before he lands to himself. So I haven't actually seen that because I haven't played him. But I have seen the damage. It's no nerf to him showing the enemies where it damaged because the damage has already been applied. It just shows it where it applied to, just so you're not like second guessing like that shouldn't have hit. It'll show you where it meant to hit. The delay before the Shark on his ult is half a second longer. The Shark actually changes how much damage it does, the size of it, the area of effect of it, and the knockback of it, as well as the slow. Like everything gets stronger the longer it charges. So it's easy to hit a close Shark, harder to hit a far Shark, and you're more rewarded for it now. But you can kind of see the Far Shark has base 500 damage with a 1.2 ratio and 80% slow with 350 knockback. And a 450 area of effect compared to less than half of that area effect, less than half of that knockback, half of the slow, and half of the ability power ratio, almost half of the damage on the baby one, and the middle shark's somewhere in the middle, obviously. So and it can no longer be placed inside a terrain. So I guess it'll just kick it out if it gets there, so that you're not wasting it by accident. Unless you were trying to do some super prediction play where they were jumping over. Can't do that anymore. Kha'Zix passive now does less base damage, but it scales with bonus attack damage rather than ability power ratio. So they kind of gave it the Jace's hammer treatment rather than having a bonus damage with AP, which made no sense on an AD character. They gave it an AD ratio, so that'll be a lot stronger. The Q has a longer cooldown. The bonus attack damage ratio is higher. The bonus damage to isolated targets is higher as well. It doesn't gain isolated damage when you evolve it, but it refunds 60% of its cooldown on isolated targets. So it makes it really easy to like solo Dragon, solo Rift Herald, especially if you get like a Death's Dance, because then you're healing for the damage it does. It's a single target heal, so it's not getting reduced. And it's on a 60% lower cooldown when it's an isolated target, which it obviously is if it's just a standalone boss kind of like that. So this does a lot of damage. The W no longer slows. The evolved slow is a little bit lower, but the slow on isolated targets is 80%. So you'll have a really hard time getting away if you get hit by that. However, the E is pretty much unchanged, I'm pretty sure. The ult is the invisibility duration is increased by a quarter second, and the evolving of it no longer gives increased invisibility duration or number of charges. But when it's evolved, he'll gain his passive invisibility and movement speed for 2.5 seconds upon entering any bush. Each bush has a 10-second cooldown. You have to be out of combat. If you're in combat, you won't gain that invisibility. But when you're out of combat, you can kind of just jump from bush to bush, gaining a shit ton of movement speed and going invisible every bush that you go into. And that's for 2.5 seconds that you have that. And it'll last an extra. It'll last a second and a quarter when you leave the bush. So you're not just stealth in the bush. You actually can leave the bush and have it for over a second as well. But it doesn't apply when you are in combat, but it felt really strong when I did it. I mean, my Kha'Zix game went horribly, so I didn't really get a good test of it, but pretty interesting. Akali here, her passive no longer just gives you raw stats. It gives you a heal on your first hit and a increased damage proc on your second hit. The passive cooldown is right here. It starts cooling down after your first attack, so you can hit with the heal, and then it'll start going on cooldown. If you hit before the cooldown reaches, you'll get the damage. If not, it'll just reapply the heal, and then your next hit will heal. And then you apply the damage, then you'll have nothing on your next hit until the passive's gone. It has a base healing, a base damage, and also scaling on the healing, scaling on the damage. This actually makes it really nice to sustain in lane, because you can just walk up, hit, wait for the passive to come up, walk up, hit, wait for the passive to come up. It doesn't feel as much healing in like an all-in, because you're not just getting raw spell vamp and lifesteal, and the passive has a bit of a cooldown. But the extra damage on the second hit feels really strong as well, because you throw your Q, break your Q, and then you have another auto that does that extra bonus damage. Pretty big. Some quality of life changes throughout Akali's kit as well. However, Akali's W now teleports her to the cast location, placing the shroud at their original location, which is kind of confusing. But basically, you can use this to hop over tiny walls. Your shroud will be placed centered where you were standing before you used it, but you will teleport to where your mouse is. I don't know what the exact range is. Apparently, it's 250. I'm assuming that's what it means there. So you can warp 250, which does warp you over walls. So you can use it, go over to a wall, and then warp over the wall. And you're usually right on the edge of the circle because it casts on the other side of the wall where you were from. And you warp over the wall. A lot of enemies will be like, oh, she went over the wall, and they'll chase you. And you can just use it as a mind game. You can walk up to the wall and then cast it on yourself, and they'll all think you went over the wall, but you're really just still standing in the stealth on the other side of the wall. And remembering this is invisibility, so they can't just drop a ward. The only way to be able to see you is abilities that reveal stealth characters like Lee Sin's E, or if you're too close to a tower. She now retains the Twilight Shroud's full bonus movement speed value until she leaves the area. And casting Twilight Shroud places Akali's other abilities on a 0.5 second global cooldown, which, as long as you hit them with your Q first, is fine because your auto attack isn't on a global cooldown. What I was unsure of here, I don't think it does, is if it put your other abilities on a 0.5 global second cooldown, that it would actually reset all their cooldowns. I don't think it does. I don't remember. I didn't check for it. That just seems broken. I think this is just an additional cooldown that goes over top of any cooldown that you had. So in case it was off cooldown, you can't use it. But it's not going to be like, oh, your ult was on a 20-second cooldown. Here's a free charge. I'm pretty sure it's not like that. I didn't test it for sure, but that just seems way too overpowered, and I don't remember it really feeling like it was doing that. The E now scales down to 3 seconds instead of 1. The damage is up early as well as later. The ratios are up early as well as later. And if it kills a unit, it refunds 60% of the cooldown. So you can slash in a minion wave, make sure it kills at least one, then slash again, make sure it kills one, and just keep spamming it. It does get you out of energy really fast because the only thing that gives you back energy in your kit is hitting your Q on a marked target, and the Q costs 20 more than the energy it refunds anyway. So you're never really gaining energy other than just waiting, but you can kind of maintain it by breaking the Qs. Her ult no longer goes down in cooldown with level. It is 2 seconds at all levels, so you dash in and you have to wait 2 seconds. So there's windows of opportunity to kill her there, but this does still scale with cooldown reduction. The ratio on it is lower and the damage on it is lower because she did get damage elsewhere on ratios. So it's more just for mobility, not damage, but it still does the damage, obviously. Zed, like I said, didn't play Zed. You no longer get bonus attack damage from his W. You get higher energy on multi-hit and longer shadow cast swap. Whenever a deathmark enemy is killed, Zed steals that shadow for himself. So this is where you get that bonus attack damage from now. You get 5 flat AD plus 5, 10, 15% of the target's total attack damage based on the level of your ult. It's never going to make you have less damage. You're not going to steal a shadow that was worse that kind of takes away AD. It's always going to keep the highest targeted one. So if you kill a Jhin that has like 400 AD, you're obviously going to be taking 15% of that plus 5. So that's nice to get an extra 65 AD. But there's a lot of situations where you're not going to get that much, and you would rather have just had this before, even though this is what you level up last anyway. I don't really know how I feel about that. I haven't done any of the math behind it. Also, his E has a higher cooldown at early levels. At level 3, it's the same, and it scales better. The cooldown is lower later on, and the base damage is up early, but down later on as well. So I never really played Zed since I didn't play him that much at all before he got changed. I haven't played him since he got changed, so kind of subtle changes. Ekko has higher base mana regen. This is the savior. This is the nicest change of the entire patch. Ekko's passive no longer slows the enemy champion. Still gives him the movement speed, but it no longer slows the enemy champion, and it does more damage early on, less damage later, but it no longer slows the enemy champion. That's the important thing to remember here. Thank God. The Q has a 0.1 higher AP ratio going out, and its radius increases temporarily as it hovers at the end, and then goes back to normal as it comes back in. His ult now restores, rather than 20% of his additional health plus an additional blah blah per blah blah, it restores 20% of health recently lost plus flat health equal to 0.6 ability power ratio, and its heal is increased by 3% for each 1% of max health lost in the last 4 seconds. This thing like full heals Ekko without much AP. Honestly, it's pretty crazy. But it is getting him more towards that AP. So you just gotta think, if you're healing for 20% of the health recently lost plus flat amount equal to 0.6 of your ability power, and that's how much you're healing for, and it is increased by 3% for each 1% of max health you lost in the last 5 seconds. Say you lost half your health because you just got hit by something big. All right, it now is healing you for 150% of all that. Oh boy. Oh boy. So yeah, he like full heals very easily. Um, Pretty ridiculous. I don't. It kind of feels like Tank Ekko is getting leaned towards or leaned further away even more now with these changes, which is nice. I think the AP Ekko is fun to play and high risk, high reward type thing. So it's nice that they're kind of leaning towards making that more viable. I'm just so happy that the passive no longer slows. Oh my god, that's the best. And Shaco, some interesting changes here. Upon attacking a unit from behind, Shaco critically strikes them and cannot backstab the same unit for a short duration. The backstab crit damage is not a full 200%. It scales with his level. It is a 200% against monsters. It's 3-second cooldown, which is affected by cooldown reduction. So champions that were able to just face Shaco when he was attacking them, he wouldn't get his bonus passive damage for attacking from behind. So it felt really good when it worked, and it felt really bad when they just wasn't able to work. So I agree with that. It has a more definite purpose. His deceive cooldown is down 3 seconds, and it's a flat mana cost at all ranks. It's not no longer 90 at level 1, so it's actually more usable. All the duration, like it was all random, the cast time, which is kind of dumb. I didn't realize, like this is just like prehistoric stuff, like pre-season 1 having random cast times on it for whatever reason it was. Stealth duration is no longer 3.5 seconds. It's actually 1.5 at level 1 and then scales up to 4.5 seconds, so you have more room to work with. It is a stealth, not a camo, so it's actually the strong version of it. It looks like they kind of lean towards making you level this as your first level up because they took away some of the power of his E and gave it different power to make up for that. We'll get into that in a sec here. The base damage is now deals that much. It has an AP ratio on it. On your next basic attack, that damage can critically strike. So AP Shaco can still be a thing. The As far as like the interaction, the damage can critically strike. The base damage deals bonus damage. It can critically strike. If you add like 500 AP on an AP Shaco, that's going to end up giving you an extra 250 plus the base stats. So it's going to give you 330 plus if it can crit, and you can make it crit by doing the backstab crit, but it's still not going to be that much because it's not a 200% crit. So I don't actually know how his damage feels. I haven't seen it at all. I don't even know if I've seen a Shaco. Maybe I think I have, but I was like really fed, so it didn't really matter. Dealing damage with deceives lowers its cooldown by 2.5 seconds. So 11-second cooldown, 2.5 seconds when you deal damage with it. Get cooldown reduction. That 11 seconds ends up now being I think 6.4 sec or 6.6 seconds. Dealing damage with it lowers the cooldown by 2.5 seconds. I don't know if the cooldown starts when you cast it or when it ends, but either way, you're going to be able to be hopping around invisible a lot more often. I think it'll be a fun play style for those who like it. You can now place a Jack-in-the-Box while stealth. Placing it briefly reveals your position, but does not make you targetable, similar to that Shimmer effect. So overall, his playstyle is like a hit and run, like where is he type, like deceptive dude. Feels a lot more set in stone. I don't know how these changes feel as far as damage wise and whatnot, or if it's feast famine, too much focus on that. Like I said, I haven't played him. I might play him in the next couple days to get a feel for it because it does kind of look fun. Shaco is kind of fun to play. The boxes now gain bonus health based on your level. There's no more random arm time. It has a set arm time. They deal less damage to turrets, and they now instantly die to turret shots and lose a minimum of 1/3 of their health from champion basic attacks. So although they have all of that health, they definitely do still die to champion attacks rather than having to hit them a lot more if you're like a support type thing with no damage. This is more to avoid them just dying to skills and AoE and stuff. Here's the Shiv. Higher slow early, same slow later. The base damage is a lot lower. The scaling is a lot lower. Well, not a lot lower, a bit lower. But the base damage is lower and doesn't scale as high either. So you would always level this first pretty much on most Shacos, unless you were leveling boxes first, doing like an AP type thing. It now deals an additional 3 to 8% of the target's missing health, and that scales with the level of your champion, not the level of the ability. So you can see it's kind of like a 1-point wonder is what they're trying to put this to, so that you can level the Q, so that you can use his kit to the fullest extent rather than having that 1.5 second slow, because the slow, or not slow, sorry, stealth. The stealth duration triples from level 1 to level 5, so it's really important to be able to use this kit that way. No longer a random invulnerability window on his ult. It is now 1/2 second, which is what its max window was before. Before it was either 1/4 to 1/2, so less RNG there. Damage to turrets is lower. Clone takes double damage from turrets. It can now attack wards. The clone now creates a nest of Jack-in-the-Boxes upon death. These boxes activate together, receiving and receive damage together. Kind of cool. Makes like a little Illuminati box. Nest duration is 6 seconds. The fear duration is 3/4 seconds. The damage is that much per attack, and it gains bonus health based on your level. I think that is kind of cool. I don't know if it still does explosion damage and then creates the nest, or if it just doesn't have the explosion damage anymore. I wasn't paying attention to that when I played against Shaco. But those are the assassin changes. We're over 40 minutes here, and all we did was this assassin and stealth changes. That was the major part of this patch. There's still quite a bit more to go through, but I'm hoping to be able to get through the next little bit in less time than it took to go through those. But that was the major changes as far as this patch goes. So we've done all of that. We'll start off here, and we'll start on another part here, so that it's not just like a hour and a half, 2 hour video. I knew it was going to be kind of long, so if anyone is still with us, that's the end of part 1. Hopefully there's only going to be 2 parts. I don't know. Not pre-recorded. So there is a part 2 here. I'm not going to be linking you to it because I'm lazy. Not going to do that on YouTube. Click here to get part 2 type thing. It'll be right after this one. So if you want to check out part 2 with the rest of the patch, I will see you guys there.